What's up, Fox Den Fox here, and today I'm going to talk about building a budget test bench and the pros and cons of doing so. So starting off with the actual building process, the one thing that you need is a test bench. And do you even need one? I'm going to talk about this in depth. So when you buy one of these, they're about $30 on eBay or Amazon. You really don't have to spend a lot of money to get an open air test bench. They're just made with treated wood. Usually they got spindles on here, but I'll talk about my trials and tribulations later. But adversely, and the reason why I bring this up in an argument is because you can buy a pretty cheap PC case and you don't have to worry about sizing issues if you're changing out motherboards a lot. Chances are they'll have micro ATX and ATX and maybe even ITX as well. So just check around for that if you don't want to have this open air sort of thing. But of course, some people want to have open air because it's much easier to swap out components in that process. With that said, what you can see here is a micro ATX motherboard. Not only is it micro ATX, but it's also the cheapest micro ATX motherboard I could find. It says $60 on the label. I'm not sponsored by Micro Center, but I gotta tell you, their prices are absolutely insane. That only costed me $40. But with that said, the reason why I recommend cheaping out on a micro ATX board or something that's as cheap as possible is because this is the one thing that remains stagnant in your entire build. The motherboard stays the same, and if there's one thing that's most likely to break, I've broken one before, is a motherboard. Especially if it's Intel, because the pins are on the motherboard, and if you want to swap out CPUs, which why would you build a test bench if that wasn't your intention, the pin one day will break. It's as simple as that. You're going to bend a pin one day. So I recommend buying either the cheapest motherboard, or if you want to overclock or get something a little bit better, shell out the extra price it's going to be for a coverage. For this, it cost me $5 for a coverage for 2 years, so if anything breaks, I can just return it. Of course, as I said earlier, this may not be for you. If you want to spend more money on a motherboard, feel free to be my guest. I will talk about buying Intel versus Ryzen later on in the video, but this I think is a great budget starter option. Buy a motherboard that's cheap, so if you break it, it doesn't really matter that much. Now, the trials and tribulations of building a test bench are pretty large. You may consider yourself a professional who builds PCs. Get it done. It's easy as hell. That was wrong. Here's a little list of all the failures that I've had in building this test bench. Okay, now that you've played Jenga for 40 minutes trying to find out where this goes, and I still probably could have built it better by having this be on this side with the I/O. I think I found where MATX goes on this. Oh, it does come with a fan. Ha! I totally thought the box was too small to have a fan on it, so I actually went out of my way and got another one of these. That sounds like crunching, right? Did I not do it right? All right, we're just gonna wing it and see what happens. Oh God, the risk. And if you're wondering why it swivels like this right now, it's because it turns out this is only full-size ATX and not micro ATX. Woo! So I'm an idiot. When I turned it on, you probably looked at me and went, "Oh my God, you don't have any RAM in that thing." Truth be told, it only took me about an hour and a half to do it, but that's still, you make mistakes, and I think that that's something that you have to understand as somebody who builds PCs, as somebody who's using a test bench. The trial and error has to be something fun for you. For me, I think it's funny, and honestly, I think building a PC from the ground up is awesome, and that's why I'm obsessed with a test bench, is because you pretty much get to build a PC as much as you want. And yes, that's pilled with a P. You're going to mess up. Sometimes the boot drive won't work. A few things that happened to me is, number one, I don't know why I expected this to work when I don't have a fitting eBay test bench. This is held up by Elmer's glue and hope right now. There's nothing that is holding up this micro ATX case other than literally prayers. I didn't realize that there was no micro ATX on this test bench. So as soon as I get done with this video, I'm going to drill holes through it to keep it secure. But as for now, just make sure if you're going to buy a micro ATX motherboard, buy a test bench that fits micro ATX motherboards. But of course, the reason why is because I had a full-size ATX before this with my Ryzen 5. And that's another thing you have to consider in this whole trials and tribulations part, is reselling. Some of you may have the budget where you can keep everything you test, but selling things on eBay is fantastic. I sold the Ryzen 5 1600 for an astronomical $120, which is pretty much what we paid for it on the day that we bought it 3 years ago. On top of that, I sold the motherboard as well, and a Core i3 6100T And that almost covered the entire cost of this PC right here, which is brand new from this year. So that is another thing they have to consider when you're building a test bench, is you have to get versed in using eBay and reselling items. The trials and tribulations of GPUs are that sometimes they don't work properly. Sometimes you're going to need to update, downgrade drivers. There's a lot of troubleshooting. Sometimes drivers take just as long as like installing the actual GPU itself, if not longer. And of course, if you're going from Ryzen to GeForce, sometimes that could break your entire system, which is super weird, but it's happened to, I think, everybody before if you've been in this game for a while. But if you decide to go from AMD to Intel, the chances of everything moving over peachy is not fantastic. So as a test bench builder, you have to be prepared to take the time to diagnose errors, to understand the world of software and hardware, and make sure that you're ready for the commitment of spending hours of your life getting through these troubleshooting errors instead of just being able to pop it in, say, all right, whatever, and then call it a day. Did I just spit on the motherboard? You know, you see in the YouTube videos, it seems like they just take out graphics cards, put them back in. But what really goes on behind the scenes is these people are probably spending an hour or more just diagnosing issues. When you're building a PC from ground up, things are bound to go wrong. So make sure you're comfortable with the layout of a PC, because again, for me, it took about an hour and a half to build this, which really isn't that long. Building a test bench is much easier, in my opinion, than it is to actually build inside of a case, especially if it's a small case. But you just gotta make sure everything's good. One of the things that was weird for me was the fact that this Intel CPU stock fan, I haven't used an Intel CPU stock fan in forever. I had a water cooler 7700K because you know this thing isn't working. Right now it's still idling at like 55, 56 degrees, which is absolutely insane to me. And I had to learn how to screw everything in because they changed it. So you have to understand that as well. So get well versed in what you're trying to buy before you buy everything. Or if you want to walk in blind and figure it out yourself, that honestly is a much more fun way in my opinion. And then of course, talking about what should you go for, Ryzen or Intel. To be honest, both contenders are extremely strong. The reason why I bought Intel today is because, first of all, I'm a huge fan of Intel. Maybe not recently because of the whole RAM thing, but honestly, I love Intel CPUs. I love to have a box. You know, it reminds me of the old days when they were on top. But it's also because gaming performance is still fantastic on these. Even if Ryzen one day overtakes these, I think that Intel will still be a very strong contender. And as of right now, I think a Core i5 is still a fantastic option, especially at the price that I got it. The price on here, which you can't see because cameras don't work that way, is $219.99. I would have never bought this if it was $219.99. I would have bought a 3600X instead. However, again, looking out for sales, at Micro Center, this was $160, which was actually cheaper than a 3600 at the time because I was strongly considering going Ryzen again, but I wanted something new. I've got a Ryzen in my system, so using a Ryzen all the time was kind of getting boring, so I wanted to have something new. And that's the beauty of having a test bench, is one day you say, all right, well, I don't want to use Intel anymore. I'll sell everything and get Ryzen for maybe $50 more. So it's all up to you. If you want to go for productivity-based test benching, then feel free to go for Ryzen. If you want to go for gaming-based test benching, then I actually would still recommend Intel, especially if you're going on a budget. Look out for sales. The Core i5, I looked on Best Buy. They had it on sale for 10% off, which is only $180. I don't recommend that. And I understand that this says $219, but it was 10% off of $189. It's a long story. Anyway, the reason why I love building a test bench is because of those trials and errors. And I think that if you're thinking about building a test bench, that is something that you probably like as well. But the whole takeaway from this video is either buy a cheap motherboard with the protection program or buy an expensive motherboard with the protection program. If you get out of the protection program, one day you're going to go, haha, I'm perfect little me and I don't make mistakes. And all of a sudden you end up accidentally spitting on the motherboard and all of a sudden it breaks and you got to turn it in. And you got to spend $40 extra or $160 up to $200 worth on a motherboard to make sure that you're going to get a test bench again. So the protection plan is very much worth it. Pick your poison. I didn't buy a protection plan on the CPU because it got to be pretty stupid to mess up an Intel CPU these days because the pins are on the motherboard. And be prepared to mess up and be prepared to have fun with it. You're going to have an absolute blast with the test bench. I know that I've had an absolute blast with my test benches in the day. And going back and doing it has been a lot of fun. So, and you get to build a PC every day. So if you don't like building PCs, then this may not be for you. If you're a person who's looking at pre-builds at the same time you're looking at this video, this isn't for you because you are going to spend hours and hours and hours absolutely going in depth with this thing. And that's the best part about it. It's not because it can run games on this well. If I wanted to run games well, I would just use my PC. But you use a test bench to see the absolute flavor and the absolute beauty of these components, and you get to learn all about it while using this hands-on experience. It's an absolute phenomenal thing, and I absolutely recommend you do it if you were watching this video and you're somewhat interested. I'll leave my parts in the description down below. Depending on how it goes, I may or may not get a kickback. That will be decided in the description, so that way I don't get sued for anything. Windows has an update on my test bench right now, which is awesome. Even though I literally just updated it. Anyway, with that said, thank you very much for watching this video. If you like this video, like, subscribe to what you're doing as always. Buy yourself something nice. I think a lot of us can agree that the camera setup with this whole spot right here hasn't been the best, so we're going to change that today. Yes, that's right. I am back in the office, and we're going to have some changes here to make this feel like the Fox aesthetic that you know. Soon, the Echo foam mats that I have will be all around this room, and